Our guest on This is America and the World is Ambassador Akbar Ahmed. He's chair of Islamic Studies at American University and Pakistan's former High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and Ireland. A world-recognized Islamic scholar, Ambassador Ahmed is writer, producer, and director of the film Journey into Europe. In his film, the ambassador travels across Europe to explore the undeniably important and positive contributions Islam has made and continues to make to Western culture. Ambassador, so good to sit with you once again.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Always a pleasure.
When you look at Islam today, what do you see?
I see a lot of challenges. I see Islam at the center of a whirlwind. I see Islam in trouble in terms of the political turbulence and the conflicts, the violence in the Middle East, in its heartland, Shias fighting Sunnis, Saudi Arabia leading an alliance against Iran and so on. I see it in trouble here in Europe. We've just finished this project. We've just got back from Europe. So there you see Muslims very often attacking Jewish synagogues, museums, individuals, and I see the backlash against Muslims. Muslim mosques being attacked, women in hijab, even Sikhs, men who wear a turban and a beard, they're being attacked because people mistake them for Muslims. So a huge challenge to Muslims, but keeping in mind that they're 1.5 billion in population, that's about 1/4 of the world population. I'm not pessimistic, I'm confident because it's such a huge population, number one. And number two, this crisis is forcing Muslims to reassess in a critical way what they're all about. What does Islam mean? What does Islam want? Is Islam about these crazy guys like the ISIS and the Taliban and Boko Haram? Or is Islam about compassion, knowledge, learning, which is what scholars like me would want to promote? Now that debate, which did not take place in spite of us talking about it for the last few decades, Dennis, is happening now. So in that sense, it may be a perverse way of looking at things, but in that sense, there is a great intellectual ferment taking place in the Muslim world. And from that, I'm confident something positive will come. The critical thing is for the West, for us here in the West, to be able to understand that dynamic and push the Muslim world in a certain direction, not to see it as a monolith, not to demonize it, and not to push those who are its natural allies into the arms of the more extremists and the men of violence.
What kind of a journey have you been on since, let's say, 9/11?
Dennis, I was in class on 9/11, and I've, as you know, had experience of being an administrator in the tribal areas of Pakistan. I've been an ambassador, I've been a scholar, and I understood that day that America had been incredibly generous to me when I came here. Really, they opened their arms, they welcomed me, and this felt like absolute home for me. And I felt this was the time, if I could do anything in return, this was the time for me to pay back. So I dedicated myself from that day on, literally 24 hours non-stop from that day on, to the media, to scholarship, to lectures, White House, Pentagon, State Departments, university campuses, with a team of young Americans, very often my students or former students. So incredibly inspiring, these young Americans. And with this, we launched 4 major projects to look at relations between the West and the world of Islam, but in a very complex way. So here's the problem, and I took 4 positions to look at the same problem from 4 different perspectives. First, the Muslim perspective, looking at the West. So how do Muslims see America, and what is their complaint against America? Then looking at how Americans look at the Muslim world, how do they perceive Islam? For that project, I spent almost a year in the field, traveling throughout the United States, 75 cities, 100 mosques with my American team. The third project was the tribal areas in the Muslim world. Those groups lying between states, the states of Afghanistan, Pakistan, in between you have the tribal areas. Yemen, the Kurds, in West Africa, again, the tribes that have produced Boko Haram. Everywhere where you see these peripheral groups, you have violence and a breakdown of order. So here's your third book and your third focus. The fourth focus is Europe and how Europe fits into this. So you see the same problem looked at from 4 different perspectives. Now when you join these perspectives, you have a fairly clear idea of what is happening in the Muslim world today and how to solve the problems that are really mutual. These problems are mutual because we are interdependent. We overlap. We are juxtaposed in terms of societies.
The new film, Journey into Europe, we want to just play a little bit of the opening of the film so people can get a sense of some of the things that we're going to be talking about. So, Darren, if we can roll the clip now, Ahmed, we can look over here and take a look.
It was here in 1492 at the Alhambra Palace in Granada that the story of Islam finally came to an end, centuries after Muslims landed on the Iberian Peninsula in 711. Over the next few centuries, Spain did everything possible to erase the memory of the Muslims. Yet here we are, centuries later, with Islam in evidence everywhere. Halal shops, women in hijab, mosques, and of course, the most popular tourist site of all of Spain, the Alhambra itself. But most important of all, that period of Muslim Spain left behind an idea of something called la convivencia, a Spanish term, in which people could coexist, live together, create together, and prosper together, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And it is this idea of la convivencia that is so desperately needed in the 21st century. And we are exploring la convivencia in Europe today.
So that gets us out of the box. How many countries? What was the goal?
The goal really was to, as a social scientist, to look at and examine the Muslim community in Europe. But as I had done with the Muslims in the United States, to look at them in the context of the larger culture, the larger history of the majority population. So understanding the majority population, its history, its traditions, its interplay between the various factions, Protestants, Catholics, North, South, all the different permutations of society. And it makes for a fascinating study because we assume, again, Europe is a monolith. And there are huge, huge differences between these very rich and very intercultural terms, societies and countries. You have the Germans with one history, you have the imperial powers like Britain and France with a different history. And we begin in Spain because Spain gives us a very interesting concept, la convivencia, which means coexistence. So if we are facing a European problem with extremism, terrorism, and after Cologne you had these sexual assaults and so on, you also have a European solution in the concept of la convivencia, coexistence. So when we say there's a problem, what should we do about it? And we begin to look for terms. Should we be multicultural, culturalist? Should we be this or should we be that? We have the concept of la convivencia, the concept of coexisting, different cultures, different societies. You respect me, I respect you. You don't force me to convert, I don't force you to convert. Mutual respect, mutual honor, and we can live together as people who respect each other.
And it did happen back then, huh?
It happened, Dennis, for centuries. Now, they weren't always good times, ideal times. There were problems for a lot of the time, but for large chunks of time, you had a society where Jews, Muslims, Christians lived together, produced together, and they produced philosophy and art and culture, poetry. It's incredible. There was a time when you had a Muslim ruler. His prime minister was Jewish, not token. He was strong enough to appoint his son as the next prime minister. And the king's ambassador to the courts of Europe was an archbishop, a Catholic archbishop. Can you imagine that happening anywhere? Here, poor President Obama, people constantly say he's a Marxist, socialist, Muslim, Martian, from Venus. I mean, everything they throw at him. So you had a time when, for a moment, it seemed that we could live together with mutual respect.
Let us take a little break. With folks at home, we're talking with Ambassador Akbar Ahmed, and he is on sabbatical right now for this incredibly important project, this new film. Chair of Islamic Studies at American University. His credential just goes on forever and ever and ever. Poet, a scholar, teacher, playwright, you name it, director, whatever it is. But we'll take a little break. Back on the other side, this is America and the World. This is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology. Sharing tomorrow. Tourism, Malaysia. The Petroleum Group, expertise with integrity in the fields of oil and gas, exploration and production, energy, and infrastructure. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services. So, there was a time that people could coexist, live together. In preparing for our conversation today, the thing that came into my mind is, what is it like to be a Muslim in America today? There must be great fear.
Dennis, I will answer that by comparing what it was like to be a Muslim before 9/11 and after 9/11.
Okay.
I came here first in 1980, and I came to the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. And all right, that's a little bit of a cocoon and an elitist island and so on. But America was incredible. You know, literally I told my wife, am I dead? Have I woken up in paradise? You know, there were walks and there were lakes and there were very friendly people, very civilized people. I didn't get a sense for a minute that I was a foreigner. And I was coming straight from Waziristan. I was in charge of that area, the tribal areas of Pakistan. So it was a very different part of the world. The great game was on. The Russians had invaded Afghanistan, and really it was a very turbulent part of the world. So that was the America that I first saw. And to me, that was the America of John F.K. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. and aspiring to the ideals of democracy and brotherhood and knowledge and the rule of law and human rights and democracy, genuine democracy. And I felt that this is where societies need to be moving towards. It's a great ideal. And it's compatible, as far as I'm concerned, with the essential features of Islam itself, which also values knowledge and compassion and respect for the other. In the ideal, this way we can match up. This is, I'm sure, exactly what's at the center of the other great world faiths, whether it's Hinduism or Buddhism or any faith. And after 9/11, and again I was privileged to be here just before and after, I saw suddenly a lot of ignorance, a lot of prejudice, a lot of hatred. And I felt, well, all right, Americans are suddenly saying, what the hell is this Islam? Why do people hate us? It'll die down. So, you know, we have to be patient and we have to try to explain, which is what I threw myself into, trying to build bridges, trying to explain, traveling extensively. But that fear has not gone down, unfortunately, continues to rise. And what I find very dangerous, because I've just come from Europe, there is a cause and effect. There's a principle here we cannot ignore in society. When you start demonizing a minority, which is essentially powerless, you abuse it, you compare it to animals, you begin to strip them of certain rights, you begin to talk of stripping them, you very quickly create a situation where all you need is one act, and from a demonized, despised minority, they become the targets of actual violence. And if you have any doubt, Dennis, look up the history of the 1930s period in German history, because this is what was happening to the Jews. I'm not saying we are in the same situation. It's a different cultural context. We have a very strong pluralist version of democracy in America, thank God, and the Americans prepared to stand up and fight for it. But some of the rhetoric I find quite disturbing and concerning. When you're actually telling a community that we will ban all Muslims everywhere, there's 1.5 billion people. When you're saying we'll close all mosques, houses of worship, when you're saying we will intern the community, there's talk of this. It's hopefully not anything more than just people sounding off or the heat of the silly season, as it were, of presidential elections. But when that begins to happen, some people take it seriously. So then that's where the attacks begin, the abuse begins. Passengers are being kicked off aeroplanes. I don't think the media is connecting the dots and not saying, it's not pointing out that, look, because of this rhetoric, this is beginning to happen. Where is this going? Because my argument is, Dennis, you have about 5-6 million Muslims in the United States. You pick them all up, lock them up, deport them, or put them in an internment camp. That is 5 million out of 1.5 billion. It's not even a dent on the Muslim world. You haven't solved anything as far as Islam is concerned. And all the figures will confirm that if there are 50,000, far too much, deaths that take place in America as a result of violence, Muslims are involved literally in 2 or 3% of that. So the idea that Muslims are running amok killing Americans is just not correct. It's just not correct. Secondly, America as a world power cannot be isolated. It cannot leave the Middle East, Central Asia, South Asia, where everywhere it needs Muslim allies, Muslim countries to be a partner. And which is, right now there are so many important countries to the United States. So I find this not only dangerous, but self-destructive, this policy. And I hope that it will tone down. I hope that American leaders will understand the dangers and begin to restore a sense of balance. I'm very often told, well, where are the Muslims? Why aren't they? And I say, why should every Muslim apologize for every idiot who does something in the Middle East? Because we are their first targets. For the Muslims who are men of violence, Dennis, we are the first targets. Because they see us as the enemy. Because they say a Muslim must be like me, which is believe in violence and must believe in killing Westerners or Shia or Sunni. You know, there's a kind of blood hysteria also taking place in these groups. How do you challenge them? You have to challenge them internally. And that's what I talk about in my projects.
So when there are people, so look at it from both points of view. The Muslim community, who must feel incredibly afraid of being targeted. Then there's stereotyping going on as well. But then there's some people who are afraid of, they see ISIS and they see that as a kind of a losing battle. They fear terrorism. How do you balance both sides of the equation? The Americans who fear the jihadists, who I will not even give them credit because of hiding behind Islam, and Americans who are legitimately afraid.
And Americans have every reason to be afraid. On 9/11, a completely innocent 3,000 people were killed. So I completely understand their fear, their shock, their revulsion. And it is up to the Muslims then to explain what went wrong, who these people are, why what is happening. But Americans need to be told, or at least the media, you, me, the scholars, the commentators, need to explain that the first victims are the Muslims themselves. Dennis, in Pakistan, something like 55,000 people have died as a result of 9/11. And Pakistanis are furious. They're really angry because they say, we had nothing to do with 9/11. And in the backlash, we've been caught up in this. The Taliban are now targeting us. You know, a few days ago, they blew up a university in the frontier province. Last year, they killed 150 students in Peshawar, which is a major capital. It's the capital of the province. Now, just think of what's happening there. University students are being targeted by the Taliban, who are also Muslim. So here you have Muslims killing Muslims. So where does hating the West come into all this?
Yeah.
So we have to understand that this is a battle not essentially against us in the West. This is the key nuance that has to come into the paradigm.
Yes, I was thinking about that, and I have a question written down here someplace. Is it a conflict within the Islamic world itself, in which we're playing a role someplace? Because there are people who don't like American presence in some of these countries.
Yes, and that you must understand, Dennis, no one wants foreign troops in their country. If we had Canadian troops here in the United States or Mexican troops, do you think you and I would be sitting here chatting? We'd be out with our old flintlocks taking on the foreign invaders. Now, what is happening in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other countries, people are reacting to foreign troops. The day they go out, you'll see the temperature going down. That will still not solve the problem because there's an implosion in those societies. Now, I analyze it like this, Dennis, very briefly. I see it in terms of 3 categories of Muslims. One, the literalists, those Muslims who see the world in literal terms. Everything is to be interpreted from the sacred text in a literal sense. So if the sacred text says, I must have a beard, I must wear traditional clothes, or I'm not a good Muslim, well, a man like me would be immediately condemned. I'm speaking English, I have a tie, etc., etc. Then the second category is the mystics. The mystics are like Rumi, the great Rumi poet, the mystic poet, who would say God created all of us. And the essential unity between us is that of love, of compassion. And you know, they absolutely adore Jesus Christ, because to them Jesus is the absolute symbol of a great Sufi saint, you know, like an iconic figure, an inspirational figure. The third category is the modernist. The modernist wants to live in the modern world. He wants to balance tradition and modernity. So he wants to say, I want to have elections, I want to have democracy, I want education, I want economic development. You must respect me as an independent human being with my own tradition, my own religion, and I will respect you. So that is the balance, and the debate and the conflict is within these three different categories of Muslims in the Muslim world.
I want to show in this first of two parts that we're going to be doing together, two programs together, another clip from the film in which you got religious leaders of supreme credential to talk a little bit about the contribution, not so much the conflict, but the contribution that Islam has made to all cultures. And let's take a look at that clip now, okay?
When the whole of Europe and the West were in sort of a dark history or dark ages, it was Islam who was being a contributor to the humanity of the West. They were the one who translated from 9th, 10th century onward all the Greek and Roman books. And through that translation, mathematics came to the West. Through that translation, we were aware of medicine. Through that translation, we were blessed to understand a lot of things about food, about health.
I'd say the whole of medieval Jewish philosophy could not have come into existence without Islamic philosophy. The rules of literature and grammar are basically taken from Muslim grammarians.
Moses Maimonides, the greatest rabbi of the Middle Ages, not only his philosophy, but almost every aspect of his work was influenced by and stimulated by Islam. His creation of this magnificent legal code was inspired by Sharia codes. His formulation of the principles of Jewish faith was inspired by the fact that Muslim thinkers had done this wonderful presentation of Islamic faith. So it spread from Islam to Judaism. It then spread to Christianity through Maimonides and influenced a figure like Aquinas. So you have Islam leading Europe out of the Dark Ages.
Say that sentence again. You have Islam leading Europe out of the
Dark Ages. And Dennis, why this is so mind-blowing is that today the perception, especially in the right-wing movements and parties, that Islam, A, does not belong to the West. It cannot be part of the West. It's foreign, it's alien, it's barbaric, it's savage because of the acts of certain people, certain individual Muslims. And B, Islam has never contributed anything to civilization. Now, these are the 2 points you'll find in almost all the right-wing charters in Europe. It's very interesting. And this film almost answered these 2 questions. And you've just heard and seen 3 of the giants in Europe. And I'm very fortunate, I know these gentlemen personally as great friends. They're great scholars, and they happen to be Jewish, all 3 of them. And among the Jewish community, Dennis, there's a great urge for knowledge. That's part of the Jewish tradition, to learn, to acquire knowledge. And with that, the urge to help the world, tikkun olam, this famous Jewish saying, to heal a fractured world. So what I found was the Jewish leaders very inspiring in terms of their world vision. Now, when I say this, people will definitely, certainly some Muslims will say, oh, well, the Jews are, they point to the Middle East and the problems between Israel and Palestine. Well, my take is that if Muslims and Jews and Christians together approach the same problem through the prism of tikkun olam to heal a fractured world, don't you think problems will be easier solved than today, where there is no dialogue, there is no understanding?
For information about This Is America and the World and to watch all of our programs, visit our website, thisisamerica.net, and look for us on Facebook and Twitter. This Is America and the World is brought to you by the National Education Association, the U.S.-China Education Trust, and F.Y. Chang Foundation, guided by Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology. Sharing tomorrow. Tourism, Malaysia. The Petroleum Group, expertise with integrity in the fields of oil and gas, exploration and production, energy, and infrastructure. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. And Ventana Productions, television facilities, editing, and distribution services.